The year was 1869, and the rugged trails of the Ozarks were beginning to stir again after years of silence. The Civil War had ended, but its ghosts still walked the hills. Among the scattered log cabins that dotted the valleys stood one belonging to widow Margaret Hale. She was a quiet woman, neither young nor old, with hair the color of ashes and eyes like gray glass, still, cold, and unreadable. People said she'd once been full of laughter before the war took her husband Samuel Hale, and with him her joy. Her cabin sat near a crooked trail where travelers often passed on their way west. She sold them bread, biscuits, and sometimes a place by her fire. Her loaves were known for their softness, baked with the finest flour she ground herself. Folks called her the Flour Widow, yet when dusk fell and the wind blew through the oaks, some swore they heard sounds from her cabin, low moans, the scrape of a shovel, and whispers carried by the wind. Still, she was kind, polite, and always wore the same faded shawl. Nobody asked too many questions. In a land where everyone carried secrets from the war, hers was just another mystery lost in the hills. One bitter March evening, a young man named Eli Turner stumbled along the Ozark Trail. He was 19, maybe 20, thin as wire, and hungry enough to chew on his own boots. His horse had gone lame 2 days back, forcing him to walk the last 20 miles. When he saw the faint glow of a cabin window through the trees, he almost cried. He knocked softly, half afraid whoever lived there might turn him away. The door opened a crack, and he saw her, Widow Hale. "You hungry, son?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Eli said, shivering. "Haven't eaten since yesterday." Her eyes studied him for a long moment before she opened the door wide. "Come in before you freeze to death." Inside, warmth and the smell of baking bread filled the air. The cabin was small but tidy, shelves lined with jars of herbs and preserves, and in one corner, a large, wooden flour barrel, its lid covered with a heavy quilt. Eli's eyes lingered on it. It was old, carved with odd patterns, almost like someone had tried to scratch out initials long ago. "Sit," the widow said, placing a bowl of stew before him. "Eat slow. You look like you ain't had a warm meal in weeks." Eli nodded, murmuring thanks. But even as he ate, he couldn't shake the feeling that the widow's eyes were watching him too closely, as though measuring not his hunger, but his soul. The fire crackled low. Eli ate quietly, trying not to seem rude. The widow sat opposite him, hands folded in her lap. "You from these parts?" she asked, voice calm and even. "No, ma'am. I was down in Arkansas working the river boats. Headed north now. Maybe Springfield, maybe farther if I can find work, got family." "None that write back," he said with a sad smile. Her expression softened. "The war took a lot from all of us." For a moment she looked far away, lost in thought. Then, as if remembering herself, she rose and went to the hearth, stirring the pot, though it didn't need stirring. "You can sleep by the fire," she said. "Cold air creeps down these hills at night. I'll fetch you a blanket." When she went to the back room, Eli's gaze fell again on the flour barrel. A faint odor drifted from it, not unpleasant, but strange. A mix of earth, metal, and something faintly sour. He pushed the thought away. He was too tired to wonder. But as he drifted to sleep later, he thought he heard creaking, as though someone were moving beneath the floorboards, or something was trying to get out. The next morning, the widow was gone when Eli woke. A note on the table said, "Fetch water from the stream, then help yourself to breakfast." He did as told, then decided to walk the few miles into town for supplies. It was a small settlement, a general store, a sheriff's office, a church, and a few dusty homes. The storekeeper, Mr. Porter, looked up when Eli walked in. You must be the traveler staying with Widow Hale. Eli blinked. How'd you know? Porter chuckled. Ain't many new faces round here. That woman's been alone near 15 years. Folks keep an eye on her, though she don't take kindly to company. Eli frowned. Why's that? Porter's smile faded. Because strange things happen up there. Travelers go missing sometimes. But maybe that's just stories. Eli laughed nervously. Stories? The man leaned close. They say her husband never left. That he died bad. And his spirit's still under that house. You listen at night, they say. You can hear him calling her name. Eli forced a grin. You believe that? Porter shrugged. In these hills, son, there's things best left unasked. Eli left the store unsettled. The wind howled down the trail as if to echo the warning. That afternoon, Eli found the widow humming softly as she kneaded dough. Her sleeves were rolled up, arms dusted in white flour. You bake a lot, ma'am, he said. Expecting company? Travelers pass through often, she said. The hungry ones always find this place. She smiled faintly, but her eyes didn't meet his. Later, while fetching firewood, Eli passed behind the smokehouse and froze. Hanging from a nail by the door was a leather satchel, cracked and dusty. The initials burned into it read R.J. His heart skipped. He'd seen a poster in town that morning. A missing merchant named Robert James vanished 2 months ago near these very trails. When he stepped back into the kitchen, the widow was watching him again. Find what you were looking for? She asked softly. He forced a smile. Just more wood, ma'am. But his hand shook when he set the logs down. That night, the fire flickered low. The widow retired early to her loft. Eli lay awake, eyes tracing the shadows dancing across the walls. Then he heard it. A faint knock, soft but steady, coming from under the floorboards. He held his breath. The knocking came again, slower now. Then, faint as a whisper, he heard it. Help, me. Eli bolted upright, heart hammering. The sound was coming from beneath the flour barrel. He crawled closer, the wood cold under his palms. He pressed his ear to the floor and felt it vibrate. Something alive was moving below. The smell of earth and iron grew stronger. Not flour, not food, something else. Something that didn't belong in a kitchen. He backed away, trembling. Upstairs, the widow shifted in her bed, muttering softly in her sleep, or prayer. Morning came gray and silent. The widow asked Eli to fetch water again, same as before. He nodded, waiting until she disappeared out the back door. Then he hurried to the flour barrel. It was heavy, the lid sealed tight. He lifted it with both hands. A puff of white dust filled the air, coating his fingers. He dug through the flour. At first, nothing, just powder. Then his hand struck something hard. Wood? Number. Bone. He froze, then brushed the flour aside. There it was, a human femur, still stained dark at one end. He stumbled back, knocking the lid over. His breath came in ragged gasps. Before he could move, the door creaked. The widow stood there, bucket in hand, her face pale but calm. Curiosity, she said softly, can be dangerous, boy. Eli didn't run. He couldn't. Her voice rooted him to the spot. You think I'm wicked, she said quietly. But you don't know the whole of it. She set the bucket down and walked slowly to the barrel. Her hands trembled as she touched the rim. My husband Samuel was a good man once, she began. But when he came back from the war, he wasn't the same. He'd seen too much, done too much. His heart turned mean. She swallowed hard. He robbed travelers on the road, took their money, their horses. When one fought back, he killed him, then another, and another. I begged him to stop, but he said the world owed him for what he'd lost. Her voice cracked. The last man he brought home was still breathing. I couldn't stand it anymore. So I waited till Samuel slept, and I did what he would have done to me. She pointed at the floor. He's under there. Along with what he did, Eli felt the room spin. So, you buried him beneath the barrel? She nodded. So I'd never forget. Every loaf I bake reminds me that evil can be buried, but it always leaves a taste. Eli left the cabin before dawn, his mind racing. He had to tell someone. By the time he reached town, his clothes were soaked with sweat. He burst into the sheriff's office, panting. "Sheriff Dobbs," he gasped, "I found bones under the widow's flour barrel." The sheriff looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. "You sure about that, son?" "I saw it with my own eyes." Dobbs leaned back in his chair, sighing. "Widow Hale's been through hell. But if what you say's true, I'll need to see for myself." By dusk, the two men rode back up the trail. The widow's cabin glowed faintly in the fading light. "Mrs. Hale?" the sheriff called. "It's Sheriff Dobbs." "You home?" No answer. Only the creak of wood in the wind. They stepped inside. The hearth was cold. The table was bare. The flour barrel stood open. The flour was gone. So were the bones. Eli's stomach dropped. She knew we were coming. On the table lay a folded note written in trembling script. Sheriff Dobbs read it aloud. "You were right to tell the truth, Eli. Evil must not be buried. But sometimes the past won't stay quiet." Behind the cabin, the sheriff found a patch of freshly turned earth. He dug with his hands until something metallic scraped the surface. He pulled out a pair of rusted iron shackles, their chains snapped in half. "Her husband didn't die in the war," Dobbs muttered. Eli stared at the broken chains, his voice barely a whisper. "No, sir. He died right here." 2 weeks had passed since the sheriff and Eli found the widow's cabin empty. The townsfolk whispered that Widow Hale had gone mad and vanished into the woods, taking her secrets with her. Eli couldn't sleep. Every night he heard echoes of her voice. Evil must not be buried. He'd done the right thing, or so he told himself. But the guilt hung on him heavier than the hills themselves. Then one afternoon, a peddler arrived in town pulling a mule cart filled with cracked pots and sacks of flour. Over a drink, he told Sheriff Dobbs, "Saw a woman down by the river a few days back. Looked like that widow, if I ever saw her. Had a wagon full of barrels." Eli, sitting nearby, nearly dropped his cup. "How many barrels?" he asked quickly. The peddler squinted. 2, maybe 3. Old things. Looked heavy, too." Eli's stomach turned. Was she alone? "Far as I could see," the man said. "But she looked tired, like she'd been running from something." That night, Eli couldn't rest. He kept picturing those barrels rolling in the dark, hiding something dreadful. The wind outside howled like a warning. Finally, he saddled a horse, grabbed his lantern, and rode toward the river. The moon hung low, silvering the trees. The river glimmered like glass. When Eli reached the bank, the smell of wet earth filled his nostrils. And then he saw it. A barrel, half buried in mud near the edge of the water. He jumped down, heart pounding, and brushed off the dirt. The markings on the lid were familiar, the same odd symbols that had been carved into the one in her cabin. He pried it open with his knife. Inside, he found nothing but flour, clean, white, untouched. He exhaled, shaky with relief. But beside the barrel, half hidden in the mud, was a small wooden box. Eli opened it and froze. Inside were rings. A dozen, maybe more. Each tarnished and bent, but clearly valuable once. Some were men's wedding bands, others women's keepsakes. Each one had initials carved inside. Eli's eyes filled with horror. He recognized one set of initials, RJ, the missing merchant's ring. She hadn't just buried her husband's past, she'd buried others. And maybe She was still out there doing it again. The sound of footsteps in the mud made Eli spin around, pistol drawn. "You shouldn't have come back," said a voice from the shadows. Margaret Hale stood at the edge of the trees, her face pale under the moonlight. Her hands were empty, her shawl clinging wetly to her shoulders. "I wasn't running from the law," she said. "I was burying them. Those poor souls my husband took. They deserve peace." Eli swallowed hard. "But the rings, those aren't all his victims." Her lips trembled. "No, not all." The river hissed softly at her feet. She looked older now, as though every lie had carved another line into her face. "I tried to live quiet," she whispered. "But there are men on these trails who take what isn't theirs. Men who prey on the weak, on women like me. When I couldn't stand it anymore, I stopped them." One by one, Eli's throat went dry. "You killed them?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I gave them the same mercy they never gave anyone else." Her voice broke into sobs. "Maybe God will forgive me. But I never could forgive myself." Eli lowered his pistol. "You could have gone to the sheriff, told him, and what would he do?" she asked bitterly. "Hang an old widow for doing what the law wouldn't?" "No, son. Men like them don't fear justice. They fear silence, the kind that comes when no one finds their bones." She knelt beside the barrel, her fingers tracing the carved markings. "Each one I buried, I prayed for. I marked their names. I thought maybe if I baked bread for others, I could feed the part of me that died with my husband." Eli felt his chest tighten. She wasn't a monster. She was a broken woman trying to make sense of a broken world. "Mrs. Hale," he whispered, "you don't have to run anymore." She looked up, eyes gleaming with a strange peace. "I'm not running, Eli. I'm finishing what I started." She reached into her shawl and pulled out one last ring, her own. She pressed it into his hand. "Take it. When they find me, they'll know I was never trying to hide, only to rest." Then she turned toward the river. Eli lunged forward, grabbing her arm. "Please, don't do this." She smiled through her tears. "You're a kind boy. The world still needs men like you. That's why you'll live." He shook his head. "We can go to the sheriff together. Tell him everything." She looked toward the dark horizon. "No one wants to hear a story that don't fit their comfort, Eli. They want evil to look clear, black and white. But life's gray, son. Always gray." Her hand trembled in his. "Take the rings to the sheriff. Let him decide what justice looks like now. Maybe it'll set me free." Before he could stop her, she stepped into the river, the current swallowing her skirts. "Mrs. Hale!" Eli shouted, rushing forward. The cold water bit into his skin, but when he reached where she'd stood, there was nothing. Only ripples spreading under the moonlight. She was gone. The box of rings in his hands felt heavier than any weapon. The next morning, Eli rode back to town, soaked and silent. He placed the wooden box on Sheriff Dobbs's desk. "She's gone," he said simply. The sheriff opened the box and stared at the rings. "Lord have mercy." Eli told him everything. The bones, the barrel, the confession, the river. When he finished, the room was silent for a long time. Finally, Sheriff Dobbs sighed. "Son, this ain't a crime we can punish anymore. That woman's already served her sentence. Every day she lived, she carried hell on her back." He took one ring, the widow's, and turned it in his hand. "We'll bury these by the chapel. Let God sort the rest." And so they did. A small wooden cross marked the spot. No names, no dates, just an inscription carved by Eli himself. "To the forgotten and the forgiven." As they left, Dobbs laid a hand on Eli's shoulder. "Don't let her ghost haunt you, son." Some stories are meant to end in peace, but Eli knew peace wouldn't come easy. A month later, a storm rolled across the Ozark Hills. Lightning split the sky like a whip. By morning, word spread that Widow Hale's cabin had burned to the ground. No one knew how the fire started. Some said lightning struck it. Others whispered her spirit had come back to finish her penance. Eli rode out to see for himself. The smell of ash still hung in the air. The cabin was gone. Only blackened timbers and smoke rising into the morning fog. But the flour barrel still stood, scorched but unbroken. Eli stepped closer and peered inside. His breath caught. Inside the charred barrel sat a single loaf of bread, perfectly baked, golden brown, untouched by flame, and on its crust, burned faintly into the top, were two letters, E.T., his initials. He sank to his knees, tears spilling down his cheeks. Somehow, she had baked it before her death. One final act of grace. He whispered, "Rest now, ma'am." "You've done enough." In the weeks that followed, strange tales began to spread. Travelers passing through the Ozark Trails claimed they heard faint knocking sounds in the hills at night. Some swore they smelled the aroma of fresh bread drifting on the wind, even when no one was baking. Eli stayed behind in the little town. He helped repair homes, mended fences, and worked with the church. He used the widow's recipe, the same one she taught him that first night, to feed the hungry and the poor. When people asked where he'd learned to bake so well, he smiled and said only, "From a woman who knew what hunger does to the soul." But every time he kneaded dough, he felt her presence, gentle, sorrowful, and at peace. Years passed. Eli Turner grew from a weary drifter into a man the town respected deeply. By the time his hair turned gray, he was known as Father Turner, the preacher of Ozark Trails. He never married, never left the hills, but his sermons were simple and powerful. Mercy, he often said, is not weakness. It's the hardest kind of justice. Every year, on the anniversary of the widow's death, he would bake a loaf of bread and carry it to the spot where her cabin once stood. He'd place it there and whisper, "For the hungry and for the forgiven." No one ever touched the bread, but by morning it was always gone. The townsfolk said the wind carried it away. Eli believed otherwise. In 1899, Eli Turner passed away peacefully in his sleep. The townspeople buried him beside Widow Hale on a quiet hill above the river where the wild flowers grew. As they lowered the coffin, a young girl, the baker's daughter, noticed something beside the grave. A new flour barrel, spotless and white, filled to the brim. Pinned to the barrel was a note written in faded handwriting, "For those who hunger, body or soul." No one knew who had placed it there. The sheriff, now an old man, crossed himself. "She's still watching over us," he whispered. From that day on, whenever storms rolled through the Ozarks, the people swore they could smell fresh bread drifting through the rain, soft, sweet, and warm. And they said it was the widow's way of reminding them that even buried secrets can bloom into mercy if the heart learns to forgive.